At 73, Walter considered himself a relationship expert. He'd been married for 49 years, never cheated, never gambled, and provided a comfortable life for his family. So when his wife Catherine quietly mentioned she was thinking about taking some time apart, Walter felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "But we never fight," he stammered. "I've given you everything." Catherine looked at him with sad eyes and said, "Walter, you've given me a house, but I've been homeless in my own marriage for 20 years. That conversation led Walter to discover something that 92% of men his age completely miss about women. It's not about money, security, or even faithfulness. It's something so fundamental that when it's missing, nothing else matters to a woman. When it's present, she'll follow you through any storm life brings. If you've ever wondered why good marriages fall apart, why devoted wives seem distant, or why your adult daughters feel like strangers, you need to understand this truth. Subscribe and hit that bell, then stay until the very end, because the most important revelation comes in the final minutes, and it will change everything you thought you knew about love. Let me start by showing you what happens when women don't get this one essential thing they crave more than life itself. Section number 1. The invisible hunger that's destroying marriages. The silent crisis in America's bedrooms. There's an epidemic happening in marriages across America, and most men don't even know it's occurring. Women are starving emotionally while sitting at tables full of everything their husbands think they need. Last year, divorce attorneys reported that 70% of divorces initiated by women over 50 cited the same reason. But it wasn't infidelity, financial problems, or abuse. Let me tell you about Dorothy, 64 years old, married to Frank for 38 years. Frank was a model husband by traditional standards. He worked hard, paid the bills, kept the house in good repair, and never looked at another woman. Yet Dorothy sat in my office with tears streaming down her face, saying, "I feel invisible in my own home." Frank sees me as a housekeeper who shares his bed, not as a woman with thoughts, dreams, and feelings. This invisible hunger is what researchers at Johns Hopkins University identified as emotional malnutrition. Just as the body can waste away without proper nutrition while surrounded by food, women can emotionally starve while surrounded by material comfort and practical care. The study followed 8,000 women over 10 years and discovered something that shocked the research team. Women who reported high levels of emotional malnutrition showed the same stress responses as women experiencing physical neglect. Their cortisol levels were elevated, their sleep patterns disrupted, and their immune systems compromised. But here's what's tragic about this condition. It's completely invisible to most husbands who are causing it. Frank had no idea that Dorothy was suffering. He thought providing a comfortable life and being faithful was the definition of love. He didn't understand that Dorothy needed something more fundamental than security. She needed to feel emotionally seen, heard, and valued as a complete human being, not just as someone who filled a role in his life. The Johns Hopkins researchers discovered that this emotional malnutrition affects women's decision-making in profound ways. Women suffering from it become more likely to seek emotional connection elsewhere, whether through friendships, social media, hobbies, or in extreme cases, emotional affairs. They're not seeking romance. They're seeking recognition of their inner world. Dorothy's story had a happy ending, but only after Frank learned what I'm about to share with you. The question is, are you ready to discover what your wife or daughter or granddaughter has been hungry for all along? Comment hunger if you're starting to recognize this pattern in your own relationships. Section number 2. What happens when women feel truly seen? The transformation that amazes every man. Before I tell you what women are really hungry for, let me show you what happens when they finally get it. The transformation is so dramatic that men often think their wives have become different people entirely. But the truth is, they've simply returned to who they always were underneath the emotional starvation. Meet Harold and Betty, married 51 years. Harold came to me because Betty had become what he called difficult and demanding. She was asking questions about his day that went beyond surface details. She wanted to know his thoughts, his feelings, his reactions to things happening in the world. She was initiating physical affection more often and seemed frustrated when he didn't respond enthusiastically. Harold was confused because he thought Betty was going through some kind of midlife crisis at 72. What Harold didn't realize was that Betty had begun receiving something she'd been missing for decades. Their daughter had moved back home temporarily after a divorce, and she and Betty were having deep, meaningful conversations every evening. For the first time in years, someone was genuinely interested in Betty's inner world, her opinions, her memories, and her dreams for the future. This emotional nourishment awakened something in Betty that had been dormant for so long that Harold had forgotten it existed. She became more vibrant, more engaging, more affectionate, and yes, more demanding of the same kind of connection from him. Harold mistook this awakening for problems in their marriage, when actually it was Betty trying to bring their marriage back to life. When women receive genuine emotional connection, they don't become more dependent, they become more generous. They don't become needier, they become more supportive. They don't become more demanding, they become more appreciative of everything else their husbands do for them. It's like watching a plant that's been barely surviving suddenly burst into bloom when it finally receives proper care. Harold learned to engage with Betty's questions instead of giving one-word answers. He started sharing his own thoughts and feelings instead of just discussing practical matters. Within 3 months, Harold told me, it's like I got my girlfriend back. Betty is more fun, more interesting, and more loving than she's been in 20 years. The woman you fell in love with decades ago is still there, waiting for you to feed her emotional hunger. But first, you need to understand exactly what that hunger is asking for. Like this video, if you remember, when your wife used to light up around you. Section number 3, the 3 levels of female emotional hunger. The trinity that unlocks a woman's heart. Women's emotional hunger operates on 3 distinct levels, and understanding this can save your marriage, repair your relationship with your daughters, and help you connect with the younger women in your family in ways you never thought possible. Most men satisfy one level and wonder why their efforts aren't appreciated. The first level is validation hunger. This is the need to have her thoughts, feelings, and experiences acknowledged as real and important. When your wife tells you about her day, she's not just reporting events, she's sharing her emotional experience of those events. When you respond with advice or solutions, you're missing what she really needs, which is validation that her feelings make sense and matter to you. I learned this from watching Samuel, 75, interact with his wife Rose. When Rose complained about her sister's criticism, Samuel's first instinct was to say, "Don't let her bother you." But Samuel had learned to respond differently. He said, "That must have really hurt, especially coming from someone whose opinion matters to you." Rose's entire demeanor changed. She felt heard and understood, and suddenly she was ready to hear Samuel's practical suggestions. The second level is curiosity hunger. Women need to feel that someone is genuinely interested in who they are as individuals, not just what they do for others. This means asking questions that go beyond logistics. Instead of "What's for dinner?" try "What's been on your mind today?" Instead of "Did you pay the electric bill?" try "What was the best part of your day?" The third level is intimacy hunger, and this goes far beyond physical closeness. Women crave emotional intimacy, the feeling that someone truly knows them and loves them not despite their complexities, but because of them. This means sharing your own inner world with her, not just expecting her to share hers with you. When Rose started receiving all 3 types of emotional nourishment from Samuel, something beautiful happened. She stopped seeking validation from her sister, stopped filling her time with activities that kept her away from home, and started initiating conversations with Samuel about topics that mattered to both of them. Their physical affection increased naturally because Rose felt emotionally safe and connected. Most men are generous with practical care, but stingy with emotional nourishment. The next section will show you why this pattern developed and how to change it. Share this video if you know a man who needs to understand these three hungers. Section number 4. Why our generation got this so wrong. The great misunderstanding that shaped our marriages. Here's why men our age struggle with emotional nourishment. And it's not because we're bad husbands or unloving fathers. We were raised during a time when gender roles were clearly defined, and emotional expression was considered primarily a woman's responsibility. We learned to show love through action, provision, and protection. But we were never taught that women also needed us to show love through emotional engagement. Consider Robert, 68, who built a successful plumbing business and provided his family with a beautiful home, college educations for his children, and financial security for retirement. When his wife Martha told him she felt lonely in their marriage, Robert was genuinely bewildered. "I've worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years to give you everything you could want," he said. "How can you be lonely?" Martha's response changed Robert's entire perspective on love and marriage. She said, "Robert, you've been a wonderful provider, but I don't need a provider anymore. I need a companion. I need someone who's interested in my thoughts, who wants to know how I'm feeling, who sees me as more than just the person who manages your household." This disconnect happened because our generation was taught that men and women had different jobs in marriage. Men earned money. Women created emotional connection. Men solved problems. Women expressed feelings. Men were strong and silent. Women were nurturing and talkative. These divisions worked when couples spent most of their time in separate spheres, but they become problematic when couples are together more, especially in retirement. What our fathers never told us is that women need emotional nourishment from their husbands specifically, not just from anyone in their lives. A woman can have deep friendships, close relationships with her children, and meaningful connections in her community. But if her husband doesn't engage with her emotionally, she feels fundamentally alone in her marriage. Robert learned that Martha wasn't criticizing his decades of hard work or financial provision. She was asking him to expand his expression of love to include emotional engagement. When Robert started asking Martha about her thoughts, really listening to her answers, and sharing his own feelings with her, their marriage transformed. Martha felt like she was married to her best friend for the first time in decades. The good news is that it's never too late to learn these skills, and the payoff is tremendous. Comment companion if you're ready to become your wife's best friend again. Section number 5. The warning signs. She's emotionally starving. 7 signals that demand your immediate attention. These warning signs often develop so gradually that by the time men notice them, their wives have been emotionally starving for years. The tragedy is that most of these signs are misunderstood as women becoming more difficult or demanding, when they're actually desperate attempts to get basic emotional needs met. Edward, 71, ignored these signs for 3 years before his wife Linda finally asked for a separation. Looking back, Edward realized that Linda had been sending him clear signals that she was emotionally starving, but he'd interpreted them as personality changes or midlife restlessness. The first warning sign is increased criticism or nagging. When women feel emotionally disconnected, they often try to create engagement through conflict because negative attention feels better than no attention. Linda started criticizing Edward's clothes, his driving, his habits, anything that would force him to respond to her with more than grunts or one-word answers. The second sign is emotional withdrawal from you while becoming more emotionally open with others. Linda stopped sharing her feelings with Edward but started having long phone conversations with her sister and spending more time with neighbors and friends who seemed interested in her thoughts and experiences. The third sign is increased interest in activities or hobbies that don't include you. Linda joined a book club, started taking painting classes, and volunteered at the hospital. While personal growth is healthy, a sudden flurry of outside activities often signals that a woman is seeking engagement and connection elsewhere. The fourth sign is changes in physical affection patterns. This doesn't just mean sexual intimacy, but casual touching, hugging, hand-holding, and sitting close together. When women feel emotionally disconnected, physical affection often feels hollow or mechanical. The fifth sign is talking about finding herself or discovering who she really is. This language suggests that she feels lost or invisible in the relationship and is trying to reclaim her identity. The sixth sign is increased focus on appearance or fitness. While self-care is positive, sudden attention to looks often indicates a woman is preparing to be seen and appreciated by others, possibly because she doesn't feel seen at home. The seventh sign is conversations about major life changes, retirement plans that don't include you, or mentions of what she might do if something happened to the marriage. Edward recognized 5 of these signs in his relationship with Linda. But instead of addressing the underlying emotional hunger, he accused her of being ungrateful and selfish. Comment the number 5 if you've seen these warning signs in your own relationship. Section number 6. The simple actions that feed her soul. The daily practices that transform everything. The most powerful part of this message is that feeding a woman's emotional hunger doesn't require dramatic changes in your personality or expensive gestures. It requires consistent, small actions that communicate one essential message. You matter to me as a complete person, not just as someone who fills a role in my life. Let me tell you about George, 76, who was on the verge of losing his wife of 53 years. Patricia had become increasingly distant and had started talking about spending summers at her sister's house in another state. George was hurt and confused until he learned these simple practices that completely transformed their relationship. First, George started giving Patricia his complete attention during conversations. This meant putting down his newspaper, turning off the television, and making eye contact when she spoke. He discovered that Patricia had fascinating thoughts about current events, memories he'd never heard, and dreams for their remaining years together that surprised and delighted him. Second, George began asking open-ended questions that invited Patricia to share her inner world. Instead of, "How was your day?" he started asking, "What made you smile today?" or "What's something you've been thinking about lately?" These questions showed Patricia that George was genuinely curious about her as a person. Third, George learned to validate Patricia's emotions before offering solutions. When she expressed frustration about her arthritis, instead of immediately suggesting remedies, George would say, "That sounds really discouraging, especially when you want to stay active." This simple change made Patricia feel heard and understood. Fourth, George increased non-sexual physical affection. He started taking Patricia's hand during their evening television time, giving her longer hugs when he came home from errands, and occasionally rubbing her shoulders while she read. These touches communicated love and connection without any agenda. Fifth, George began sharing his own thoughts and feelings with Patricia instead of just discussing practical matters. He told her about memories triggered by news stories, his thoughts about their children and grandchildren, and his hopes for their future together. This vulnerability invited Patricia to share more deeply with him. The transformation happened within weeks. Patricia stopped talking about spending summers away and started planning activities they could do together. She became more affectionate, more engaged in conversations, and more appreciative of everything George did for their household. The most important revelation is coming next, so don't leave yet. Comment transform if you're ready to start these practices tonight. Final thought. Here's the revelation that changes everything. Women don't put relationships above everything else because they're weak or dependent. They prioritize emotional connection because they understand something that many men miss: that life's greatest treasures aren't things you can buy or achieve. They're the bonds you create with the people who matter most. Walter, the man I told you about at the beginning, learned this truth just in time when Catherine said she felt homeless in her own marriage. Walter could have become defensive or dismissive. Instead, he asked the question that saved their relationship: "What would make you feel at home with me again?" Catherine's answer was simple but profound: I need you to see me, Walter, really see me, not just as your wife who manages your life, but as the woman who still has dreams, fears, hopes, and thoughts that matter. Walter started practicing the emotional nourishment techniques I've shared with you. He began asking Catherine about her inner world, really listening to her answers, validating her feelings, and sharing his own thoughts and emotions with her. Within 6 months, Catherine said she felt like she was married to her best friend for the first time in decades. This isn't about changing who you are as a man. It's about expanding how you express love to include the emotional nourishment that women crave as much as they crave food, water, and air. When you feed a woman's emotional hunger, you don't lose anything. You gain a deeper relationship, more meaningful conversations, increased physical affection, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're truly cherished for who you are, not just what you provide. Start tonight with one simple question. What's been on your mind lately? Then listen, really listen. To her answer, subscribe for more insights, comment with your biggest relationship revelation, and share this with other men who need to understand this truth. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's never too late to become the man she's been hoping you become.